My name is Rankin. I'm the MP for Victoria, and I'm just delighted to see a lot of you folks out there, both here and up there as well. This is a fabulous, fabulous turnout. Thank you so much for coming. Before going any further, I would like to invite Teles to please come forward and give us a traditional greeting.
My Indian name is Teles. That name is passed down to me from my grandfather, the late Johnny Daniels. It's common. Cullen drives. That's who I am. First of all, the Coast Sailors welcome. I'd like to welcome you all here. The Coast Sailors territory, which from the Nanaimo or Comox, the East Island, all the way down to the States. There was no border those days. All those people down there are part of our tribal groups, the Coast Sailors territory, the Coast Sailors seas. So, Haiska, I'd like to welcome you all. And I'd like to comment, although I have a chance to speak later, but I can take this opportunity now. I want to raise my hands to each and every one of you, and especially to Murray, colleagues, Sierra Club, for doing what they're doing. You know, as a young boy, I grew up pretty well living off the land. I never went hungry. I fished for my grandmother as a young boy. And as time, people stood up to the people, the corporations and the governments, what they're doing. They're destroying this land all across Canada, this world, really. The corporations and the governments. In my middle age, when I went into the big house, my grandfather, I was sitting up high in the bleachers, and he called me and told me to sit beside him. And my great-grandfather told me, he says, grandson, you've got to sit, you've got to learn, you've got to listen. The elders taught me. They said, get up and speak. Get up and speak. He said that to me for four times. So I had to get up and learn to speak. Those are teachings from old people. I took a lot of training, but it was done orally in our traditional way. So I ask in each and one of you, and raise my hands again and say, Haiska, to get up and speak. We've got to fight this government for what they're doing. The Haiska CM.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it, Teles. And I want to then formally acknowledge and recognize that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Algonquin, the Coast Salish peoples, the current Songhees First Nation, and the Esquimalt First Nation, and appreciate very much that we're meeting here on their territory. I am really grateful personally to be able to live and to work in this territory, and for the chance to bring so many people together today to talk about something which I think is urgently important, and that is the Enbridge Northern Gateway Pipeline proposal and tanker proposal. There'll be a lot of opportunity for us to dialogue together today. We have an amazing panel I'll introduce a little bit later, but I want to just say a few things first. I know that I had invited both Chief Sam of the Songhees First Nation, who I met a couple of weeks ago, and invited him here. He wasn't able to be here, nor was Chief Thomas of the Esquimalt, and I'm sorry, I know they send their regrets. We have intended to have for the hard of hearing, we had intended to have a screen and the like, but unfortunately that didn't materialize. But there will be a transcript that's being created at the moment, and thank you for doing that. It'll be available to people as if you want to get a copy of it, please speak to our people at the exit, and we'll certainly make it available to anyone who would like a transcript of this. Just to build on what was said by Teles, I want to say that when the first European explorers arrived here in the 18th century, they found that the Algonquin practiced a far more intricate system of property relations that they were accustomed to. Some things were held in common, others were held by extended families with overlapping rings of ownership. And ownership didn't just confer rights, it was understood that it conferred responsibilities as well. And I think failing to manage that resource properly was the source of loss of prestige. I think those insights are important as we talk about the urgent reason that has brought us here together today. Because those communities coexisted in a sustainable way for generations on this coast. We have a truly incredible group of people here today. I'm looking forward to introducing them to you in a moment, but I want to acknowledge in the audience my good colleague and friend Randall Garrison. If you could please stand up, Randall. Randall, of course, is the MP for Esquimalt-Juan-de-Fuca, and he has done amazing work in protecting the southern resident orca-pods, and I'm so grateful for all that you do. We're going to have a lot of time for dialogue. We've got a lot of presentations, but they're going to be short. The issue today is to try to engage in a dialogue, and if we don't have the chance to answer all the questions, can't answer them, and we're able to do so by email or phone or mail later, we'll certainly undertake to make to try to address everything that comes up here today. I want to say a few words of a personal nature before I introduce the main speaker and the panelists. Northern Gateway matters a great deal to me personally. When I ran in November, a year and a half ago, this was the issue on the doorstep. This is the issue I talked about with so many thousands of people. I think I met 2 people who were maybe a little bit in favor of this project in all that time. This community is united in respect of this issue. I think people would agree. When we talk about tankers heading from Kitimat into Douglas Channel and Hecate Strait, I've had the great pleasure of kayaking in that area. I've been in boats in that area. I've had the honor of representing, when I was a lawyer, the Kitsalis and Kitsim-Kalem, as well as the Haida. I know this territory. I know how deeply it's treasured by the people who live there. And I also know how incredibly dangerous the waters are in the area that these tankers would be going on. I know you're going to hear a lot more about that today. So I just want to say that the fight that we're going to have is the fight of our lives. We have in front of us the future of British Columbia, and I dare say the future of Canada. Northern Gateway proposal is one of the most wrong-headed proposals to ever gain the support of the Conservative government. And that's saying something. You know, I don't trust this company. I don't trust this government. And I'm not willing to gamble on the future of our coast and our economy for this project. When I had the honor of going to Ottawa and representing the people of this wonderful city, I knew that the decision was going to be made in Ottawa. Sure, the province has a lot to say, and I hope we can talk about that later. But the fights, in my judgment, is not going to be won in Ottawa. The fight is going to be won in rooms just like this. First across British Columbia, and then I hope across the entire country. When people like you come together, we're showing this government that it is simply unacceptable for citizens of this land to be sidelined by something that is so important. So with that said, I would like to introduce you to the person who took the initiative to bring us here together today. And that's my good friend and colleague, Nathan Cullen, Member of Parliament for Oakley-Skeena Valley. Skeena-Oakley Valley, one of those places. Columbia. He's been the representative of that territory since 2004. He's been the opposition House leader. He's now just been announced as the critic for finance for the official opposition of Canada. And those of you who followed Nathan's work will know just what a powerful and passionate advocate he is for Northern British Columbia and for developing a greener and stronger economy. Many of you might have been with Nathan and me when we were at the Defend Our Climate rally in Vancouver a few months ago, and you would have heard Nathan speak out so incredibly eloquently against Enbridge. Nathan, welcome. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I always dislike when, thank you for that warm welcome. Makes me nervous when people say, oh, the guy you're about to hear from is really eloquent. Oh boy, he's gonna knock your socks off. And I never heard anything like it. I always think, no, don't say that. I apologize for having my back to my friends here on stage. I want to speak to you as briefly as I can. This is tough, about an issue that we in the Northwest have been fighting for some time. We're at ground zero. We're on the front line. We're in the crosshairs. Take all those violent analogies that you want, because sometimes it feels quite violent, the conversation that goes on around oil and politics in this country. We've experienced something that I hope other Canadians don't have to experience. And that's when you're made to feel like you're the enemy by your own government. And the way that that we got that certain designation was simply by raising our voices and standing up for our communities and for the land of which we are guardians. The notion that let me give you the basics, because I don't want to assume everybody in here has got them all, but 1,100 kilometer bitumen pipeline going from Alberta out to the port in Kitimat, with a twin pipeline going the other way, bringing condensate. 225 super tankers meant to leave the port in Kitimat. 11,000 sailings over the lifetime of this project, which are meant to go down the Douglas Channel, through Gerald's territory, do a little S-turn through some Duckin Islands, up through the Hecate Strait, one of the most powerful places in the world by Haida Gwaii, and then on to China. That's what they're suggesting. Pipeline filled with raw bitumen. You got to pump it at twice the pressure and 70 degrees hotter than you do oil, and it's highly corrosive, and you need to mix it with things to even make it move at all. That's what they want to do. And I've been at this for a bit. And I thought at first it was just out of some cynicism that our natural resources minister, now our finance minister, follow that bouncing ball. If this is what gets you promoted in the Harper government, I hate to see what gets you demoted. He decided in a letter written to us that if any of you did have the audacity to ask questions or be concerned or even be opposed to this government's plan, that made you an enemy of the state. Hold with that for a minute. When a government, a sitting government, calls its own people enemies, when it calls them radicals and terrorists, foreign-funded radicals, it was meant to do something. The effect I think they were looking for was that your voice doesn't count. You ought to be quiet, you, and you're just the fringe, you're the margins of this conversation. Well, in the Northwest, where I live, it had the opposite effect. To a lot of progressive people, middle of the road, conservative people, living in a free and fair democratic country like Canada, to be called names like that by your government, you got a couple choices. When you meet a bully, I got 3.5-year-old twin boys, Isaac and Elliot, and they came home the other day from preschool and said there are bad boys at school. There's a bad boy. And I said, what happened? He said, he took my toy. And they were upset about that. And here's parent moment. What am I going to tell them? They got choices. Don't hit him in the head. Don't smack him. But don't back down either. You gotta stand there and say, that's not right. That's my toy. And if that doesn't work, then you go get some friends and stand there and say, that's my toy. And if you need to, you go get a teacher and you stand there and you stand up for yourself. Because with a bully, when you back down and give them what they want, that doesn't satisfy. They come for the next thing. And to the point where you got no more room left. So us in the Northwest, we know how to deal with bullies. I got so much to say, but I'll leave it at this because I'm so interested in hearing from the people on this stage. We've been in Powell River, Campbell River, Courtney, Nanaimo, and Duncan, and something's happening at all those places which really fills my heart. In each place we ran out of room. We had to bring in chairs, then we had to bring in more chairs. Then we brought in more chairs again. A nerve has been touched by this project. It's more than a pipeline. The project on its merits is a disaster and a known threat to the way of life of the people of the Northwest, and I would argue coastal British Columbia. It is an economic nightmare for this country to send raw resources out to China simply because they want them, and shipping out the jobs while leaving the mess behind. I'll tell you a small story, and then I'm going to be quiet. A couple years ago, I got invited down to Washington and got to meet with all the big wigs. And one of my meetings was with a Texas congressman, Republican. And I love this guy because he walked in with a big old entourage, and he was out of a movie. 6'5", and cowboy hat, and the buckle, and the boots, and the whole bit. And he came in and he said, here, I brought Billy here. He's an intern, but he's from Canada. Because they told me I was meeting with a lefty politician, so he's going to translate for us. So I can understand what y'all are talking about. And so I say, hi, Billy, where are you from? And he says, I was born in Montreal, but I left when I was 2. How's Canada? And I said, it's pretty good. You know, it's got some troubles. And we get to talking, and we get on great, me and this Texas Republican. And at one point, he stops the conversation. He says, I'm confused about something. And I said, okay. He said, we're talking Keystone at the time. He says, is your government in favor of this project? Do you want this thing to go ahead? And I said, yeah, our government is in favor. He says, that's the part I don't get. And he said, take this message home to you to Canada. If the roles were reversed, and we had the oil and y'all had the refineries, it would be over my dead body as a Texan we'd ever send it to you. Raw. No way. But thank you so much, you nice Canadians, and your generosity for giving us all that you have. You're such nice people. This one-time resource it's insane. When you meet with the people in Fort McMurray, the mayor, the representatives, they beg you to stop issuing leases because they can't handle it. It's all foreign temporary workers, and we're overrun, we're overwhelmed. So I believe in what the radical Peter Lougheed said, former premier of Alberta. Everyone's getting to be a former premier of Alberta. It's a tough gig. That's a tough gig, boy. And Lougheed said, that socialist, he said you should act like an owner. That's what government needs to do. That's what people need to do. You need to go slow and get your fair share. Act like an owner. This is not their pipeline. This is not their coast. It's not their oil. This is our conversation. This is about us. And we are going to pack halls right across this province. And in 90 days, when the cabinet of the Canadian government makes a decision on this pipeline, they will not be allowed to say they make the decision in ignorance to the feelings and wishes of the people of British Columbia. We're going to let them know over the next 3 months. And if they make the wrong decision, come 18 months' time, when we go to the polls in this province, we're going to let them know too. Because these guys can't have government without this province. Our leader got up the other day, Tom got up the other day and said, our number one job, our number one priority is getting rid of the Stephen Harper government, and we are willing to work with other parties to get that done. We need to see the end of this government and bring voting system that finally makes every vote in this country count and our parliament reflective of our wishes. This is about more than a pipeline, folks. This is about so much more. Ultimately, it's about us. It's about our voice. It's about what we do when we're being bullied. And the beautiful tradition of such a great place like British Columbia is, when challenged, when threatened about things that we care about, we stand up, we stand shoulder to shoulder. First Nations to non-First Nations, neighbor to neighbor, and we raise that voice. And that's what we're here to do today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nathan. Shy kind of guy, not very eloquent, right? You get that. I'd like to introduce you now to members of the panel. I thought I could do so one by one if you'll let me. We're going to go down this way, and I'll introduce them, I think, in that order. I've asked each of them to deliver opening remarks under 5 minutes, just to kind of get the ball rolling and to talk a little bit about success stories. Because I think people, if it's true that 2/3 of the people in British Columbia are opposed, and the polls say a majority think this is going to happen anyway, we're here to say it's not necessarily going to happen. It is not inevitable, and we can stop it. We can stop it, and we will stop it. And that's what this is about today. I would like to start by introducing Gerald Amos, who traveled a long way to be here with us today. Gerald is the former director of the Coastal First Nations. For 12 years, Gerald served as the elected chief councillor of the Kitimat Village Council. Gerald.
Thank you. Marie, am I on? Gonna scream into it? Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and I gather this is supposed to be local voices, and I'm from Kitimat, so I don't know how I'm qualified to be local. But it must speak to the urgency of the issue that Nathan just outlined. At first, I want to acknowledge our hosts from the Coast Salish First Nations of the area, and thank you for the kind words in inviting us. What the heck do you say in 2 to 4 minutes that can even set the stage for what we want to do here today? First of all, I want to say that I kind of struggled with respect to my friends in the NDP. I came here kind of reluctantly, I have to say this, because of something that Nathan touched on, and I'm glad he spoke to this. This issue of Enbridge and the other resource development pressures that we're facing in the north and probably the country. As I've said in the past, it might sound kind of crude to some of you. However, a few years back, I said that when we were doing some of our own work up in our territory, that this is no longer about Indians and environmentalists. It's not our responsibility to take these issues on, issues that threaten the well-being of all people. It can't be any longer viewed as a partisan type of a fight. It's not about the NDP. It's not about the Liberals here in this province, or the Liberals federally, or of Stephen Harper. We all breathe the same air. We all subsist to some degree on the food that's offered us from the environment, and we all share that responsibility. It can't simply be on the back of a First Nation or a group of First Nations or environmental groups. We all share the responsibility, and if we don't step up to the plate, I fear for the future. with respect to the Enbridge issue, there's a school of thought, unfortunately, that it's a done deal, that the native people and the environmentalists have done such a good job in the north that we shouldn't worry about it any longer. That's dangerous. And I want to put that to bed because it's not over. They're shoveling money off the back of the bus like you wouldn't believe in terms of the plebiscite coming up in Kitimat that some of you may have heard of. And some of us in our communities, particularly the coastal First Nations, you may have heard Art Sterrett say this, but I've contended that we're in a position on Enbridge, that if we lose on Enbridge, all of the good work that has preceded us, in terms of the court battles that have been won, the legal battles that have been won, the on-the-line work that has happened with the Tahltan, with the Niska, with the New Channels, with the Wet'suwet'en, on and on. All that good work could be jeopardized. It could be over. And we could find ourselves in a position, I think we will find ourselves in a position, if we allow this one to pass us by, where the government will just continue to thumb their nose at us and get away with it. So I think we have a huge responsibility to make sure that we don't lose it, and we need your help. How do we speak of successes in a minute that I've got left? I took part in a small victory when I was the elected chief in Kitimat, where we protected just under 1 million acres of old growth forest called Kitlow. And some of you may have heard of it, but the company eventually gave up their cutting rights in that territory, that part of our territory, with no compensation. To their credit, they gave it up. And it was done relatively quietly. After the announcement was made, we had a lot of people who kind of sat up and said, how the hell did that happen? You know? And I think those kind of victories are possible when people come together. As my friend Bruce Hill says, who I work with, when you bring people together, good shit happens. And that's, I think, the order of the day is we need to continue this. Your responsibility, together with this group here, is to make sure that people continue to come together on this issue. And if we can't sustain it, then we may lose the day. But in the case of the Kitlow, we were fortunate enough to have people in government who believed in what we were doing. We had the good fortune of having people in the company who, after a while, realized that we were serious and that we were probably going to kick their butt. And they came around, and we had outside experts in the form of EcoTrust who enabled us to bring people together to work for us. And one of them is sitting in the crowd right here. Renee worked with us for quite a few years, and I'd like to thank her publicly for what she done with us in Kitimat on these issues. But you know, that's the recipe, I think, for success, is bringing people in all these sectors together to have a conversation. If you can't do that, we're not going to have success. On a downside, I came here just wondering what the heck we're going to accomplish in an afternoon. And when I left Portland last evening, I started reading this book called The Sixth Great Extinction. And I don't know if I want to read any more than the first chapter that I went through, which is dealing with amphibians and frogs that are going extinct. And a simple fungus is killing them off and spreading around the world, according to the research that this fellow has done, a research that he speaks of. And when I read that opening chapter, I couldn't help but think of my youth in Kitimat, growing up. And it's part of the reason why I say we're all in this together and we all share a responsibility. For whatever our reasons, we make these mistakes together. When I was a kid, I grew up playing around in this frog pond, right in the middle of our community. Thousands and thousands of frogs that the ravens fed on, that the skunks fed on. I don't know what else fed on them, but quite a bit of wildlife used them. We covered up that frog pond as a community to build 4 homes. We made that mistake as a community. And, you know, when I read this first chapter, it kind of hit close to home, remembering what that little piece of our territory looked like, right in our community. And I think that, you know, it scares the heck out of me to consider that my granddaughters are not going to have the opportunity that we've had to enjoy those little places in our territory, or even around our homes anymore, to watch these frogs or to watch the bird life. So many things are going extinct. Our hooligans in Kitimat, in our territory, are, as far as I'm concerned, are extinct. We had 5 rivers that had hooligans in them. Every one of them has been in jeopardy for 15 to 20 years now. And, you know, I happen to think, I mean, that's kind of the downside, but I happen to think that if we get a little bit smarter about this, the earth is like our body. You know, we all know that if you don't put bad stuff in your stomach, you probably lead a pretty healthy life. But if you put crap in it, you're going to get sick. When you quit, you lose weight pretty quick. I mean, it's no secret. We're very resilient, and I think that our earth is the same way. But are we going to be smart enough? That's the question. I hope so.
Thanks so much, Paul. The next speaker is Caitlin Vernon, who joins us from the Sierra Club of British Columbia, where she's the campaign's director. Some of you know that Caitlin is a biologist by training and has done amazing work in protecting the Great Bear Rainforest. Thanks so much.
Okay, hi everybody. I also would like to acknowledge Coast Salish territory that we're on, and I also really want to acknowledge the leadership of Gerald Amos and the rest of Coastal First Nations who have been real leaders in this struggle against Enbridge. And as Gerald said, I mean, from my perspective, these First Nation leaders are speaking up as governments for their people, and our job is to make sure that our governments speak up for us as well. So this is not just a story of one company wanting to build a pipeline. This is a story of a government that's turning into a petrostate, the gutting of environmental regulations, the muzzling of scientists becoming an endangered species in and of themselves. It can be overwhelming. It can be hard to know how to respond. It's not possible to talk about Enbridge without also talking about the multitude of other proposals that this province, this coast is facing. Democracy, Indigenous rights, workers' rights, environmental issues, we're all under attack on so many fronts. And yet you know that old saying, that first they ignore you, and then they laugh at you, and then they fight you, and then you win. So when it comes to Enbridge, it's pretty clear that we have so successfully organized a massive, diverse movement of opposition that big oil is fighting back. So things at times may seem dire, but this story is so far from over yet, and I have faith in the strength and courage of British Columbians to stand up for a just and sustainable future. And we've been asked to talk about successes, so I draw so much inspiration and hope from struggles of the past. So many of the things that we take for granted today were fought for by people just like us. Ending segregation in the United States, women getting the vote, the labor movement, best known for bringing us the weekend. Climate change. Climate change is the fight of our generation, and we can learn a lot from the BC labor movement, the proud history of the BC labor movement, about how to organize for the collective good. And really, when we think about Enbridge, Enbridge actually is a labor issue with all the jobs that would be put at risk. There's so many success stories in BC. Protecting Guayhanas, protecting the Stein River Valley, creating the BC Park System, conserving 1/3 of the Great Bear Rainforest and launching a new ecosystem-based economic model over the rest of the region, getting Shell out of the sacred headwaters, stopping the proposed mine at Fish Lake again and again. And that's just to name a very small few of the successes. So what were the leverage points in those campaigns? How did we win those campaigns? It's clear there's no one-stop campaign plan. There's no one thing that we need to do. But here's a few reflections that we can then think about as we approach what next on Enbridge. So on most of these campaigns, there were court challenges, and sometimes there were blockades to create legal uncertainty. There were boycotts and divestment campaigns to create financial uncertainty. There were alliances built between labor and faith groups and businesses and local communities. Elected representatives heard from their constituents again and again. There were people in the streets again and again. Alliances with First Nations were key in these campaigns and are key now. Most of BC is unceded land, and any decisions over resource use need to happen on a government-to-government basis. People found their courage, people found their voice. And importantly, people were not willing to accept the dominant narrative that such and such a proposal was inevitable. Creative alternatives were dreamed up and implemented. And in all of these campaigns, all hands were on deck. And as we go forward, we need all hands on deck. If you think about the struggle to protect Guayhanas, for example, it was the Haida elders in regalia, on the road, getting arrested that the world watched. But at the same time, behind the scenes, there were people all across the country who were involved, writing letters, raising money, lobbying their politicians, sending food, organizing in the background. With any big struggle, there are many, many roles, and all of them are super important. And yet, throughout any campaign that I know of, throughout any social movement that I've heard stories about, we argue with each other over tactics and strategy. You all know this. Should we be naming the root causes of injustice? Or should we be toning down our message to reach out to those who are not yet involved? Should we be supporting communities on the front line? Or should we be doing electoral organizing? Should we be talking about climate change and capitalism? Or should we just talk about Enbridge and oil spills on the BC coast? So here's my perspective on all of this, is we actually need it all. We need all of these things happening. And my hope is that we can respect one another in this. We can respect that there's more than one way to make change in the world, because we are all in this together. We do all have a responsibility. So let's support one another. Let's find some humility that our way may not be the only way. Because after all, by stopping Enbridge and doing something about climate change, I don't just hope we build a world in which we respect the earth. I also hope that we can build a world in which we respect each other as well. Thank you.
Much. Can you hear me? There you go. Thank you. Okay, really. Not sure I'm appreciating this microphone very much. It's the angle, I think. Our next speaker is Kai Nagata, who just recently joined Dogwood Initiative. Some of you may know Kai from his, there you go, from his work on CBC and other, he's a journalist by training. And Kai's worked for both CBC and CTV, and he's now the Energy and Democracy Director for the Dogwood Initiative.
So we've been asked to share some stories of successes, and I wish I could talk about the long string of victories that we've racked up in the 10 days since I took this job. But the truth is I haven't yet figured out how to get into my voicemail, so I figured I would tell a story from my family, from the past. And I've never told this story in public before, and I'm not sure it's politically correct, but it's true. So I need to take you back to a hot September night in 1907 in Vancouver. And my great-grandfather, Asataro Yoshida, after whom I'm named, came over, got bored on the farm in 1905 and decided to try his luck in Canada. And he was there at an interesting time in BC history. There was a group in San Francisco called the Asiatic Exclusion League that had begun whipping up some xenophobic sentiment on the West Coast against these workers, one of whom was my great-grandfather, had come over to these cities, and they moved from San Francisco up to create chapters in Portland and Seattle and eventually Vancouver. And so to celebrate the opening of the Vancouver chapter of the Asiatic Exclusion League, they held a big march and a rally. My great-grandfather was one of the people from Japantown who went down to check it out. And what he saw was 1,000 angry young men passing bottles as the band played Rule Britannia and listened to speeches about how we're going to throw the Japs back into the sea. And he and his friends turned around and said, "We should warn people." And they went back to Japantown and they said, "This is coming at us and we have to get ready." And so he talks about, I never met him, but this comes to me from my grandmother who he told. And she's 90 now, she lives in Burnaby. And he describes the little kids running up to the rooftops to pile bottles and chunks of brick and tiles from the roof. And the shopkeepers started trying to build a barricade across Powell Street. Meanwhile, one thing led to another back at the rally, and somebody had the bright idea, let's trash Chinatown. And so the whole mob, which at this point, according to the newspapers, had been joined by another 2,000 or 3,000 people, descended on Chinatown. And they smashed every single window and looted the shops there. And yeah, there's these eyewitness accounts of families huddled in the middle of their stores while people ran up and down the alleys with torches, screaming in a language that they barely understood. And then the mob got to Japantown, and there's a few hundred guys, my great-grandfather included, and all they had was, bats and 2x4s and kitchen knives and broken bottles, and they went up against a crowd of 4,000 drunken longshoremen and mill workers. And this is nighttime by now, so this is all happening under streetlights. And the kids are on the roofs launching bricks into the mob, and there's cops on horseback trying to corral people, utterly failing. And my great-grandfather has this image that he remembers from this melee, just looking up and seeing this shopkeeper come out, middle-aged guy with this package wrapped in cloth, taking off his glasses and his jacket, and unsheathing a nodachi, this 5-foot ceremonial sword. Now, I don't know what happened after that, but I do know that in the morning, when they went out to survey the damage, the broken windows stopped at the 500 block of Powell Street. I am not here to advocate civil disobedience or direct action. But I would consider the fact that I'm here now a success story. I mean, he survived that, and then 3 years later, he survived the Rogers Pass slide, one of 2 workers to survive. 58 people died. And then they survived the Depression, and then they survived the internment and the infectious respiratory diseases that ripped through the camps in the mountains. And then in 1948, we won the right to vote. Sometime after women, sometime before First Nations people. But it wasn't given to us. We won that. We fought for it. And I think that's why I'm here today, and I hope that's why you're here as well. Because we got to use it to lose it. And this is not something that's given to us, this is something we have to take. So, I hope what you talk about.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much. Can you hear me? This microphone's going to drive me crazy. I'd like to next introduce my good friend, Professor Chris Tollefson, who comes to us from the University of Victoria Environmental Law Center. Chris is the founding director of the first public interest environmental law clinic in this country. And with the assistance of his students, Chris represented 2 environmental organizations at the Northern Gateway hearings. And he's already filed one of the first judicial reviews of the panel's decision. Thanks so much for coming, Chris.
Thanks very much, Murray. Can you hear me all right? It is a great honor to be on Coast Salish territory. It's a great honor to be here on Coast Salish territory, to be on this panel, and to be at this important gathering. I want to talk a little bit about who we are, who I'm representing here today from the Environmental Law Center. ELC is a nonprofit society that partners with the Faculty of Law to run the clinic that Murray is talking about. And actually, Murray was the chair of the society for a number of years. What we do is to provide students the opportunity during their law school to provide legal services to deserving clients around the province on important issues. And I'm going to talk about some of the work that we've done on Northern Gateway in a minute. Our goals include promoting access to justice, promoting rigorous science, and inspiring and training the next generation of public interest environmental lawyers. And some of those lawyers that have been working on Northern Gateway with us are here tonight. We believe, especially that in a context such as Northern Gateway, that it is important to pursue public interest litigation as part of a broader strategy. And I think that's part of the reason that we want to talk about this issue tonight, is how the litigation fits into the broader campaign. We got involved in Northern Gateway about 2 years ago, and became more intensively involved about a year and a half ago when we were retained by 2 radical organizations, mainly representing bird watchers and wildlife aficionados. BC Nature and Nature Canada hired us. As the technical hearings, the cross-examination phase was approaching, they needed some legal help. They needed lawyers to go to the hearings and ask tough questions of the Enbridge experts about their application. And so we geared up for that with the help of the students. We went to 4 different hearings, 1 in Prince George and another 3 in Prince Rupert, and asked some tough questions about things like caribou habitat and mortality, about their spills modeling, about the probability analysis that they've done, about impacts on marine birds and other creatures. And through that process, I think we developed a very compelling record of deficiencies associated with the application. And at the end of the hearing, we went to Terrace and we made a submission that this application had to be rejected. It was incomplete. It was riddled with deficiencies. We weren't surprised by what the panel said by any means. In approving the project, we think they neglected what we had to say, but on the record, we say, going forward, there is significant uncertainty, there is significant deficiency. And as a result, our client, BC Nature, retained us to go to the Federal Court of Appeal, and along with 4 other groups, we are presently in litigation in the Federal Court of Appeal seeking to overturn the JRP's decision. And we will be, the 5 groups will be consolidated in hearings. All 5 groups are working closely together, 3 First Nations organizations, ourselves, and EcoJustice. All 5 groups are working together. We are being consolidated into what will be one of the biggest ever hearings at the Federal Court of Appeal that will occur this fall. The work that we did before the JRP, asking those questions and getting those answers, and sometimes non-answers, that will be the basis for our appeal going forward, and we are very confident in that appeal. Now, I want to talk a little bit, I think that's a success story in itself, that all 5 groups have gone forward together, we're fighting it, but I also want to offer some thoughts about reasons to be optimistic about the path ahead. I think it's important for us to recognize that this tribunal, this JRP, and even cabinet for that matter, that they are subject to the rule of law, that they are subject to judicial oversight by our superior courts. That's a very important principle. It may be a little bit old-fashioned, it may be a little liberal democratic, but it's a very important principle here. And I think that it's a principle that we can celebrate this week in particular for two reasons. One is the decision of our Supreme Court of Canada in decisively rejecting the appointment of Justice Nadon. Absolutely. This is an important decision. It affirms our system of democracy. But there's a somewhat lesser known decision that I wanted to tell you about that happened a week ago last Friday in a case that the ELC brought on behalf of 4 petitioners, Dr. Gagne, who is here today, Gerald Amos was one of the participants in this litigation as well. We represented 4 petitioners who wanted to have standing to challenge a decision of the Ministry of Environment to give a permit to Rio Tinto Alcan and Kitimat to increase sulfur dioxide emissions by 55% indefinitely. We went to court because the EAB, the Environmental Appeal Board, said that these 4 petitioners were not people who had standing or should have standing to challenge this permit. And we went to the BC Supreme Court last week, a week ago, for 4 days and argued our case. And on Friday, a week ago, we got a decision. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Mr. Justice Mackenzie ruled decisively in our favor, establishing in the process establishing a new test, a new approach to citizen standing and group standing to challenge tribunal decisions around resource permitting. It's an approach that we say will allow for robust access to justice for anybody who feels they are aggrieved by a resource permitting decision and can put forward some reasonable basis, in fact, for them being considered to have standing before environmental tribunals such as the EAB. So I think that both of those decisions this past week give us some reason to be optimistic, to be potentially confident that when we move forward in the Federal Court of Appeal in the fall, that with your support, we will prevail and right will be done. Thank you very much.
I'm holding it right here. How's that? Okay. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it, Chris. Now, our next speaker is Torrance Coste, who some of you know has a strong background in the nonprofit. Oh my God. There. Torrance has a strong background in conservation geography and in the nonprofit sector generally. And Torrance now works with the Wilderness Committee as the Vancouver Island campaigner. Thanks so much, Torrance.
How's that? Can you hear me at the back? All right. It's a little hard getting this far down the panel, and can't help but repeat some of the things that my friends have said earlier. And the first thing I want to echo them in saying is the thanks and acknowledgement of the Coast Salish peoples whose territory we're so lucky to live on. I'm here today because when we talk about Enbridge, a spill, to me, like it is to most of you, is a notion that's completely unacceptable anywhere on this coast. That being said, I think it's critical that when we talk about this, we frame this issue in terms of its impact on climate change. We're hearing a lot of rhetoric, a lot of discussion about the percent chance of a spill or the number of years in which a spill could take place, 1 in 200, 1 in 1,000. And I think all this is a distraction. It's a distraction from the fact that every single drop of tar sands that would come through that Northern Gateway Pipeline will spill eventually. Some of it's going to spill on the coast, and the rest of it is going to spill into our atmosphere and change our climate forever. So, this is an issue that has to be part of the debate around this pipeline. We have to include in it conversation about ending our use of hydrocarbons as fuel. That has to be included. For this reason, we have to continue to fight other proposals of a similar nature. This isn't the only proposal to bring tar sands to this coast. There's other fuels. U.S. thermal coal is a major one. We have to look at them closely as well. We have to stand up and say no to them as well. That being said, the Northern Gateway Pipeline is a crucial first battle, the first big game of the season, and it's one that's not going to win this war, but it's a battle that we have to win. This is daunting. It's been mentioned, the powers that support this, the powers that want to see this pipeline built are well entrenched. They have deep holds on our economy, on our political system, unfortunately. But luckily, we've been in this situation before, or a similar situation before. I'm fortunate, very, very lucky to work for the Wilderness Committee, and working for the Wilderness Committee means working with some of the most seasoned activists on this coast. For an example, one of my bosses, Joe Foy, started working with the Wilderness Committee before I was born. He might not be happy if I dated him like that, but he's in New Westminster, so I'm safe. Talking with him and others and learning about the history of the BC environmental movement, you start to see a pattern, you start to see something that develops, a recipe for success on these kinds of fights. And the pattern that emerges is organizations, communities, citizen groups with different tactics, different outlooks, put their differences aside and work together to do two things. To stand up and support respectfully First Nations in the area that we're working in, and to do what's right for the environment. It's simple as that. We saw this recipe, we saw this pattern, we saw this conversation come together 30 years ago on Mears Island in Clackwood Sound, when New Channel First Nations, with the support of communities and environmental groups, stood up and stopped McMillan Blodell, a logging giant that in the mid-'80s was more powerful relatively than Enbridge is in BC today. They stopped them dead in their tracks, and for that reason, they're still some of the biggest trees in the world standing on Mears Island, as they have for thousands of years. We saw it again in the Ilaho. Caitlin mentioned the Stein Valley in the 90s, and we saw it most recently a few weeks ago at Fish Lake in Chilcotin Territory. I believe that if we continue to follow this formula, stand with First Nations on the Central Coast and across the province and the country, speak up for what's right, stand together, put our differences aside, and use all tactics at our disposal within reason, I have no doubt that we can win this battle. Thank you.
Torrance, I believe. Thanks so much. Can you hear me down there? Can you hear me all the way down there? Our final speaker is someone we're very, very fortunate to have with us today, and that's Carol Linnen. She joins us from the DeSma Canada organization. She's the managing editor and director of research. For those of you who read her stuff, you'll know she focuses particularly on energy and environmental policy, and she's done some really amazing investigative pieces on important issues. Thanks so much, Carol.
It's an honor to be sitting at this table, and if we're talking about looking for solutions, just to look down this table, I think is enough to give even the gravest hearts a hint of hope. Instead of repeating so much of what has been said, I'm gonna tell you a story about when I was a kid. I grew up in a poor family, 5 kids. My parents owned a carpet cleaning company, but we had a big, beautiful backyard that we lived in and played in. We didn't even have television, so really the forest behind our house was everything to us. And I remember one time as a kid, our lawnmower broke, and my mom sent me and my brother, who's about a year older than me, out to go fix the lawnmower. I think I was 12 and he was 13. And we looked at her and we said, "Mom, we don't know how to fix a lawnmower." And she said, "Well, you'll figure it out." And it was interesting because in the process of trying to fix the lawnmower, we actually learned quite a lot about how that lawnmower worked. It was a few years later that I left Vancouver to head to Toronto to do a master's, and eventually I moved to Europe to study environmental philosophy. And it was during that time when I was away that the Northern Gateway Pipeline issue really ramped up. And it wasn't just that this was another industrial proposal. It wasn't just that this was a pipeline connected to the oil sands, very dirty source of energy. It was about the tenor of the conversation and how dramatically it had shifted in Canada, and how under threat the very prospect of a democratic conversation had come. And I remember feeling really homesick and desperately missing this piece of land, this coastal, this beautiful coastal part of British Columbia, and I felt this real pull to come back and to be involved in this issue. And at the time I was writing for DSMOG and writing all these stories about what was happening here, and I felt like I needed to come back and be a part of it. So when I came back, part of my job was to collect the stories of people who were affected by this issue. And I've been doing that for a couple of years now, and in some of the most unusual places. Recently I traveled to Cochrane, Alberta, which is just a little bit north of Calgary. Conservative ranch lands, a lot of people who made their fortune in oil and gas, who bought a nice plot of land where they're gonna live out their dream and have some cattle and have the grandkids over. And the reason I was there was because these conservative ranchers had felt like their land had come under threat of fracking, and that they couldn't get anyone to listen to their story. They felt like everywhere they turned, a door was closed in their face, and there was no one to listen to them. It was disheartening, to say the least, that a group of people like this had to turn to an independent media outlet like DSMOG to have their voices heard. But at the same time, there was something incredible sitting around these dinner tables with these folks who said, I never even really considered the fact that I was a conservative. I just was a conservative, and that's who and what I was. That wasn't up for question. But things have become so bad now, we find ourselves really questioning our allegiance to beliefs and values that we held to be sort of unquestionable before. And sitting around this table, this one gentleman said, I never in 1,000 years thought that by the time I reached 67, I would, for the first time, be calling myself an activist. And in some ways, the experiences of a lot of people across Canada right now, just like I felt compelled, home from Europe to be here to fight for these issues, we're seeing these sort of unusual suspects being drawn together for so many reasons. And this pipeline isn't just, a piece of metal kind of crossing a landscape. It is something symbolic that is drawing people together from all over the country, people who are concerned about climate, people who are concerned about jobs, people who have for a long time been fighting for First Nations rights. We are seeing such an incredible unity being built around this. They want to call the Energy East pipeline a nation-building pipeline, but in some ways I'm like, I think the Northern Gateways already should deserve that title, and not for the reasons that perhaps the federal government would want. In my studies, I'm also a student at UVic, and I just had to reread The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and it's a really devastating portrait of a world come undone. You don't even really know why, but it was a continuation of some sort of logic that brought humanity to this destructive and very sad place. And there was this one line, reading it again this time, that really struck me. McCarthy wrote, "Maybe in the world's destruction we will finally understand and see how it was made." And in some ways, I wonder if we feel that way with the environment right now, but we are also seeing that kind of with democracy. And I think that this threat that we're facing right now, in some ways, has renewed our vigor and our inspiration to not just fight for the environment, but to fight for democracy. This pipeline, if anything, has shown us that democratic decision-making has also very much come under threat in this country. And people are becoming frustrated with that. And so in many ways, I see solutions as groups like the Environmental Law Center flexing that legal muscle just a little bit more strongly, looking for creative ways to use the legal landscape that we live within to protect those democratic rights. But then also so many other groups who are creating those solutions and building those solutions where we haven't seen them before. So in many ways, just to bring it back to my mom and the lawnmower, my mom is a pretty conservative lady herself, and she's a Christian lady, and also never questioned her values and her political persuasion so much either. But recently she said to me, if we were really sticking by our values as Christians, we'd really be fighting for the environment too. And that was a real shift for her, and it's just affirming to me this strange bedfellow situation we're finding ourselves in. So when we're thinking about solutions, really it's every single one of you sitting in this room is a solution and a part of the solution, and we're all ambassadors for that new story we want to tell. So just to end on that note, we've got lots more practical solutions to talk about today, but thanks for having me here today.
Thanks very much, Joel. Thanks to all the panelists. Now I'm going to turn it over to Nathan Cullen.
The microphone from here's what we're thinking is we try to frame this in a more hopeful kind of context, or a purposeful context, because don't you sometimes feel overwhelmed? And what am I going to do about it? I'm just one person, and this thing feels so inevitable, as some people have talked about, when in fact it's not, but only if we do something. So we're going to talk about doing something next. What's going to happen is we've suggested that y'all are going to talk to each other for a couple minutes, because you just heard us talk. You're going to turn to a neighbor or two and tell them what you heard. And second, talk about an idea, a thing that can be done. A thing that can be done, a real thing that can be done, with the purpose of this, that in the next short interim, 90 days, our voices can be best heard all the way across the country, over the Rocky Mountains, and into that bubble in Ottawa, and into the Prime Minister's mind. Scarier places that can be sometimes. But that our voices are heard. Specific actions is what you're going to be calling from. We're going to take 10 minutes to hear those from you. After that, we're going to have about 10 minutes of some questions. Not speeches, but questions. I know who you are out there. And then we're going to have the panelists wrap up. And we're going to try to get you out of here about 10 to 4. We're going to be available for lots of comments and all the things in the foyer with these amazing people. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay, so the first couple minutes you have to do is say what you heard to somebody sitting beside you. Say hello if you've not met them before. And I'll call you back in 2 minutes' time. What did you hear, and what are we going to do about it? And I guess something that we can do from this side of the room. Something that we can do to bring into the hearts and minds. That gentleman there.
Great, thanks. Take a look around you. Where are all the young people? Where are they? Seriously. More than half of the panel reflected on stories of their youth. Their grandfather or their grandmother told them that. And I sure hope the people that are sitting here as #1 action plan will speak to their children and grandchildren and bring them to events like this. I think it's terribly important.
Absolutely. Great idea. So, engaging.
Well, this is my key. It's to my bike lock. And I've traded that for my car keys. And I also have this, which is my bus pass. And I just came, and I live on Salt Spring Island. And when I come to Victoria, I don't really like to come in here, and I don't like to go to Vancouver because of all the cars. And I just came from changing gears over at Pearce Centre, and when we think of oil, you need to think about those keys in your pocket, okay?
Very good. Thank you.
I turned 70 this year, and I've never had the experience of going to jail for civil disobedience. I think in the next 90 days, I would very much like to see a collection of those of us of my age or younger who, when they try to push this thing through, we say, we're going to go up. Let the Prime Minister know in 90 days, we're going to be up there. And if you try to push this thing through, it's going to be next thing to a civil war in this province. He needs to know that there are going to be thousands of people standing there saying, no, no, no.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, as you so eloquently put it earlier, Nathan, the First Nations are on the front line in the crosshairs, and on and on. Down here, we've got the numbers of people. We've got money. We've got resources that can go towards helping those First Nations. But I really don't know how the best way to do that is. And if perhaps you could suggest some ways that people in the southern part of BC can really support First Nations, I think that would be a great help.
Everywhere I've been in the last couple of years, I've been in London, England. People there wanted to talk about Enbridge. Winnipeg, in the interior, Castlegar, and we had a similar amount of people in Castlegar. So, and the same question comes up everywhere we've been: how can we help? What can we do in terms of assisting First Nations? Well, there's a movement just beginning now to attempt to frame a way of bringing people from different areas like Victoria. I mentioned the interior BC. People want to help. So there's a particular to the joint review challenges that was spoken of here earlier. There's some funds already being raised, and maybe you can speak a little bit to the nuts and bolts of it. But there is a movement afoot to put a face to that, so that people know where the money is going to go, and people can actually say, we might want to support the Heisler, or we want to support the Gitgatla or the Gitgat. You know, there's different ways of doing it. Maybe you can speak a little bit to the nuts and bolts of it.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think from my perspective, how do we stand in solidarity with First Nations? There's direct ways that we can support, and then there's what I spoke about earlier, which is that we really need to make change happen in our own communities, in our own government, and being in solidarity doesn't just mean standing. It means standing with. So it means, you know, organizing our own actions and lobbying our own governments and so on as well. And I can speak more about some upcoming activities later. But on the specific direct support to the First Nation legal challenges, the Gitgat and the Kitkatla specifically have requested financial support with bringing these cases forward. Launching a judicial review of the Joint Review Panel decision is very expensive. So they've requested support. So there's going to be a fundraising campaign where the money will go to those First Nations. As you know, it's one tangible thing you can do to help reject and criticize the result of the Joint Review Panel and stand in solidarity with the nation. So the idea is that there will be an online donation opportunity, as well as folks will be encouraged to organize fundraising events in their own communities as a way of raising the issue, getting in the local media, building that community power, supporting the First Nations, and very tangibly supporting these legal challenges.
I'll try to be quick, but we've shared the frustration over the years. We've been to so many of these meetings, so many rallies, and we make great speeches, and we go home feeling warm and fuzzy for a little bit, and then that's it. There's nothing, to use the word tangible, coming out of it. And I think that if we can collectively start to put together a fundraising campaign that's very public in our own local newspapers, and you can bet your bottom dollar that we're being monitored. And I think when the governments find out that there's a folk storm brewing in terms of support for First Nations, it's their worst nightmare.
I'd just like to undo a little bit of the spin that's gone around about this thing. It's possibly the best argument against Enbridge is that they're going to send that tar sands, I'll use the word tar, it's going to China to make plastics. They keep sliding this out that it's for energy, but it's not for energy, it's for plastics. They're probably going to build a petrochemical plant in China, and the reason they're going to do that is because it's cheap labor over there, and they can pollute a good deal more than they can here. So the best argument is to hit Harper with it. Why don't you do it in Alberta, and then control the amount of air pollution? If you're going to do it at all, better not do it at all, but this was a lesser evil. Do it in Alberta, and keep the jobs here. And why do we send this to China? Because they're shipping this plastic back to us. Anyway, there's 2 mile long trains going through the Fraser Valley every day.
Save the trip.
Save a trip. So
Okay.
I'll cut it off now.
Thank you. We're back.
Nathan, welcome to Victoria. Nathan comes from my territory. My name is Ludwig Allen and I belong to Gitxsan territory. However, I'm a visitor to Victoria. I'm also the NDP Aboriginal Commission co-chair. I want to speak specifically about the Northern Gateway Pipeline and the First Nations that they say that have signed on to the Northern Gateway Pipeline. When they say that, you know, First Nations have signed on, do they mean the whole territory, or do they mean one specific person that really needs the money in that territory? And so I have a real problem with that. And you know, and the other fellow talked about the Ulikans. Well, I haven't had Ulikans for a long time, and I want to be able to have Ulikans and, you know, our salmon for the next 7 generations. So what am I going to do? We actually have a meeting next week with the NDP Aboriginal Commission, and those are things that we're going to be talking about. But on another note, I want to talk, Nathan, specifically about Vancouver Island. And in this territory here, yes, I absolutely want to stop the Northern Gateway Pipeline, but I think we also have to start talking about Kinder Morgan, that is giving people and Kinder Morgan is really throwing money, like $40,000 at bands here, and, you know, finding people that used to work for the band to recruit them, to, you know, have them sign on to Kinder Morgan. So let's stop Northern Gateway, but let's also stop Kinder Morgan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The lady right here. We're going to do 2 more and then we're going to wrap it up.
Thank you, Nathan. A shameless plug, but a very effective one. I agree that the legal levers that the First Nations are able to work with, their constitutional right to protect their environmental rights, is key to the kingdom in this thing. And there is an organization right here on the South Island called Raven, and it has one sole elegant purpose, and that is to raise money to help finance First Nations lawsuits. They don't tell the First Nations what lawsuits to do. They just say, you choose, it's an environmental defense, we will help raise the money. So one thing that you can do that's simple, don't get mad, get out your checkbook. Thank you.
All right. So again, thank you. This is great. I said it before, one of the things we want to offer people is the ability not to feel that, as Gerald says, you go to the meetings or the rallies and it feels futile. Because we all are in violent agreement with one another in this room, and for the most part, and yet there's what's to be done. All those links to Raven and the First Nations funds and the different environmental groups and initiatives that are going on, we want to include and give you, not just for your own purposes, more importantly, for all the people that you know who are not active but care. Because if it just stays in these rooms, if it just stays in these halls, we run the risk of losing this argument, losing this case. And when people start to talk about Kinder Morgan and the unfair laws around fracking in BC and on and on and on, and the democratic deficit, all those things, this is the first one in front of us over the next little bit. We're going to wrap up, and I'll start. We had these hearings up in the north, the NEB hearings, and people go and make their 10 minutes of testimony to the panel about what we care about. And a woman in Smithers, Monica Howard, whose sister Allie swam the entire Skeena River in 2009. Beautiful event. But Monica was going to testify and she didn't know what to say, and her husband was watching the hockey game while she was trying to write her notes. And she was listening, and they played the anthem, and the light bulb went off, and she realized it was right there. So the next morning, in front of the panel with, the panel's there, and a couple hundred people in a hall in Smithers, she sits down and she says, well, here's what I want to tell you. Here's my 10 minutes of truth about this pipeline and these rivers and what they mean to me. And she stands up and she starts singing "O Canada." And the panel turns her microphone off. You can't sing in here. And she doesn't know what to do because it's all she really had. And so she sat down and thought about it, and then she started to just say the words and recite it. "O Canada, we stand on guard for thee." And when she finishes, she says, there's only one thing that's repeated in that song. "We stand on guard for thee." It's done 3 times. It's an instruction. It's a command. It's a direction to us as people. And that's what I'm doing here today with you. And she stops. And at the back of the hall, 2 guys get up. And they start to sing "O Canada." And everybody gets up and they all sing "O Canada." And the poor panel at the front, they don't know what to do, so they stand up too and they listen to "O Canada." It's in the song. It's in the song. That's all we're doing here today. It's been amazing. We're gonna go down and hear a closing from everybody and then from our friend. Thank you very much for coming out this afternoon. It's a pleasure.
I see people already leaving, and I'm going to do my best to be quick. I want to tell a few little stories, and some of they're relevant, I think. Somebody talked about the youth. I'm with the Headwaters Initiative. It's a small First Nations environmental organization. And one of the things that we're doing this summer is we're going to bring a number of youth, primarily from the coastal First Nations. There's a young group that you may have seen some of their work that they've been doing lately on bears, the bear hunting issue. And there are people like Jess Housty from Bella Bella, Megan Moody from Bella Coola, and a few other young folks. Well, I say young because they're like between 25 and 30, so they're young people to me. But we're bringing them out on a trip together with a number of others from the interior, and I think it would be really interesting to consider if there's any youth from down here in that age group who are interested in working on these issues with us. What we intend to do is bring them out to this lodge where there's no cell phones, there's no computers, no nothing, and just plunk them down and tell them, talk. Save us. The other thing was, what can we do? I'm part of a group called EcoTrust, which was born when we were fighting to save the Kitlow, and I just came from there last evening, at one of their board meetings, and one of their subsidiaries that does work with them done a study recently on the money. They looked at the money that is given as a subsidy to the Keystone Pipeline, and they done a what-if scenario. What if they took that money and used it on different kind of pipes, like water pipes, infrastructure in the communities that are going to be affected, and lo and behold, there would be more job created. There'd be more of a benefit to the economy of those little towns and places. And you can find it if you go to the EcoTrust website and look under reports. You'll find that report's a really interesting look at the issue. One of the things that struck me about this gathering today, Marie, was the laughter. I had a grandmother who lived to 102. I like to tell this to make myself feel better that maybe I'll live a little longer. But she was 102. Her grandmother was 112 when she died. And I remember this one time around my mother's supper table. I have a brother who is a bit more intense than I am. And he was going on about the state of affairs with respect to our community. And the residential schools and all that, the stuff heaped on us. And it's getting pretty uncomfortable around the supper table. So my grandmother, in our language, said, not to him directly, but just speaking in our language, he said, you know, if you can't laugh at yourself anymore, pack your tent and go stay by yourself. It's not fun being around you. So you have to retain that laughter. If we lose that laughter, what are we left with? And that's what kind of made me feel good listening to you folks laugh this afternoon, for whatever reason, you know? Mostly at Nathan. It's time that, as our friend Tom Berger said, the best thing we can do is turn around and take a step back to the future.
Okay, thanks, Gerald. I will keep this short, and I'm going to get all tangible on you about some things that can happen over the next few months. We talked already about the fundraising support for First Nation legal challenges, and in response to the woman who spoke about Raven, we are in fact working with Raven, so they will be the trust fund by which this is happening. And again, this is not just about writing checks, but it's about organizing fundraising events in your community, because one thing we know we need to do is we need more people than are in this room, and each of us know a lot of people. So hold a potluck, hold a film night, hold a dance, whatever it is, make it a fundraiser, raise awareness, reach out to those new audiences. So that's one thing. Number two, May 10th. May 10th, there's going to be another National Day of Action against pipelines, tankers, and climate change all across this country. My colleague Galen, he may be here. If he's not here, he's out at the Sierra Club table. Oh, he's waving at the back. Talk to Galen. There's already planning meetings happening. We want to make this big. It's an opportunity to raise a lot of noise on Enbridge before the federal cabinet is making their decision in June. And then speaking about June, stay tuned, because we know that the federal cabinet is going to be making a decision, and we know that we're probably not going to be quiet about that. So we will likely need your involvement and support. Another thing that you can really tangibly do right now is that Douglas Channel Watch, which is a community group based in Kitimat, seriously, this is ground zero. Kitimat is holding a plebiscite on the Enbridge project on April the 12th. This is an interesting situation. From my perspective, a highly unfair situation. There are no advertising spending limits in place on this particular plebiscite. Enbridge has been placing ads in Kitimat and across the north. Enbridge is knocking on people's doors. They are phoning people in Kitimat, and Douglas Channel Watch are the folks that are on the ground organizing against this to, support their community to get out and vote no to Enbridge. So Galen at the Sierra Club table has their address if you want to send them a letter of moral support, or if you want to send them some money for buying ads and so on. They would appreciate your support. Do whatever you can to keep Enbridge and the opposition to Enbridge in the media. This takes all of us. This takes writing letters to the editors. Specifically, if you know people in other parts of the province, friends, family, relatives, encourage them to write letters to their community papers. Community papers are extremely important, so the more that we can constantly get this message into them, the better. There's more things, but the gist of it is that for each of us, we have to do what we have energy for, and for every single person that looks different. But whatever it is, I've said this before, but I'll say it again, consider stepping outside your comfort zone and doing more. Go one step beyond. Enbridge has not gone away yet, but neither have we, and we need to make this movement bigger and louder and more organized than we have yet seen. So together, we can do this. And most importantly, I also always say this, but I'll say it again, look after yourself and support one another and laugh, as Gerald said, along the way, because this is a big struggle. It's not just Enbridge, it's bigger than Enbridge, and we're in it for the long haul, so let's look after each other as we get there.
I just want to go back for a moment to something that Gerald just said, and it's a good reminder that there's in fact two legal systems that govern the place that we're sitting right now. And most of the time we interact with the more recent one that we see on the surface, but there's a deeper set of laws that provide a guide to how to survive in this landscape indefinitely. And our work at Dogwood is to help bring that more recent set of laws more in line with that more ancient set of laws so that we can survive for another 10,000 years on this coast. So we're not fighting a mob of drunken racists. As much as we might want to believe those stereotypes about the Conservative Party organizers that keep winning them the elections, but if we go up against the global fossil fuel industry with broken bottles or even rusty samurai swords, we're going to lose. We need a more powerful weapon. And I think the most powerful weapon that each of us has at our disposal is that vote, the power we have to cast a ballot. Because we still have a principle in this country that each person gets a vote, and despite what Mitt Romney says, corporations are not people, and pipeline companies can't vote. So how do we make that vote meaningful? I think the answer is that we have to organize between elections, and that's the focus of our work at Dogwood. Can anybody here remember ever voting on Northern Gateway? If you had a chance to vote yes or no on Northern Gateway, put up your hand if you would participate in that vote. Why do you think they haven't asked your opinion yet? We have a tool in British Columbia that no other province has under the Recall and Initiative Act, and it's how the HST was defeated. It's called a Citizens Initiative. And this is not a tactic that is to be taken as the magic bullet or the one-size-fits-all solution, but it's an excuse to organize. Because if all other legal and democratic avenues fail, we in BC have a tool that no other province has, and I think it's incumbent on us to use it. Do you think that if each of you had a clipboard, we could get 10% of the voters in Victoria on side to have a vote on oil tankers? I think so too. We have 43 teams right now working in BC. This is already happening. We have 4,000 people lined up to receive training. And we're going to keep organizing until we are big enough to trigger this thing and win. If that day doesn't come, obviously we're not interested in setting it off and getting egg in our faces and losing. But between now and then, this is something that you can do literally every night after work if you're so inclined. And we have people in Victoria, and some of them are in the crowd, who do this, and it has become their hobby. Because every single signature you collect gives us one more voter that we can get back in touch with the day that we launch a Citizens Initiative, or the next federal election, or the next provincial election. These are not mutually exclusive. So if you're willing to participate, even just to sign to say that you would vote in a Citizens Initiative, we have clipboards out in the lobby where you could go and put your name down. And if you're willing to volunteer and come out with some of our teams and take that number from 43 to 85, you can go to notankers.ca, and pledge to support the Citizens Initiative and sign up for training as a canvasser or as a riding organizer. Thank you very much.
Folks, I want to talk a little bit about the legal battle that lies ahead and the brave organizations that have put their names forward to fight in that. I certainly honor Gitsala and Gitgat and Haisla First Nations, and they deserve your support. They have fought hard. They have excellent legal teams. It's a full-on, and I can say this because I'm on another legal team involved in the same battle, it's a full-on job to fight this battle. Every day we're spending a good chunk of the day fighting with lawyers on the other side, and this battle will carry on into the fall. It will be one of the largest hearings ever convened in the Federal Court of Appeal. It will be in Vancouver, probably for at least 2 or 3 weeks in duration. And those First Nations deserve your support. But I don't think it would be fair to put upon them the full burden of winning this battle, and we haven't done that. There are some brave civil society and conservation organizations that have put their names forward as well. We represent BC Nature, which, as I said, is a well-known radical organization here that's primarily interested in bird watching and wildlife conservation. Eco-Justice is representing what's called the Environmental Coalition, which is Forest Ethics, Living Oceans, and Raincoast Conservation Foundation. The legal teams that are fighting on these environmental issues are fighting pitched battles as well, and very important battles. They are taking on, to a large extent, the burden of trying to overturn what we consider to be an unfair and completely unjustified conclusion offered by the JRP. And it's quite likely that we will have to as well file separate petitions to fight federal cabinet when they go forward and approve this project on a fundamentally flawed basis. So all of these groups are likely to be fighting two colossal legal battles at the same time. And these petitioners deserve your support. I mean, we talk about legal fees. There's also another issue that you may not appreciate, that by putting your name forward on a petition, you become liable if your petition is unsuccessful for the legal fees of the other side. And on the other side, of course, is Enbridge and their friends in CAP and other groups that are likely to sign up to intervene, but as well the federal government and as well the NEB. When you total all of their legal fees for these two different legal proceedings, which may ultimately end up in the Supreme Court of Canada, you can imagine that that's a fairly important decision to make. You have to think long and hard about deciding to go ahead, and these groups have done that and have proceeded nonetheless. So they deserve your support. We're working together as a team, and we need you to focus on the fall when this hearing happens and ensure that the word gets out about how important it is, and ensure that the details of these lawsuits are properly covered in the media. There's definitely being well covered in places like DSMOG and the indie media, but I think in many ways the mainstream media has yet to invest the time necessary to understand what's at stake here. They understand it at the level of platitudes and superficialities, but I think that the mainstream media has to be schooled in how to cover this story, and I'm hoping that you guys can help us to do that, and I thank you for your support.
So I'm another from the any and all camp. I think we need to be using all the different strategies that were suggested tonight, be it litigation, be it political organizing. The reason that we need to do this is because it's what the other side does, be it the CAPP, be it Enbridge, be it the federal government. They're using ad campaigns, they're using backroom meetings, they're using everything at their disposal to try and push these pipelines through. We're an advocacy organization at the Wilderness Committee, but we believe that advocacy and education is all of our responsibility. My favorite part of this afternoon, my second favorite part, my favorite was the story of the 5-foot samurai sword being wielded on the streets of Vancouver. My second favorite part was where we turned to our neighbors and we talked. And I think that's what we need to be doing in every part of our lives every day. There was a comment on engaging young people like myself, and that's what we need to be doing. We need to be talking to them at dinners, at potlucks, another thing that was mentioned. By doing this, I think it becomes crystal clear for everyone that our opposition to Enbridge and to the other issues that were spoken to from the floor, Kinder Morgan, the flaws in our democracy, it becomes crystal clear that our opposition to these comes not from a place of anger or frustration or hate for the economic haves. It comes from a place of love for this coast and for the people that live on this coast and in this province and in this country. And I don't believe that's a place that if we come truly from there with our whole hearts and our whole spirits, we can lose. If we come from that place, we will win. Thanks.
Well, one thing we know for sure is that at least the people in this room have a lot of staying power. So thank you for being here and staying here over time with us. I don't need to echo what everyone here has said. If you're looking for solutions and a way to get involved, you've got a whole plethora of opportunities here. If you want to read about those opportunities, please check out DSMOG Canada. We write about a lot of the work of these organizations. We try to push it out to mainstream media. I think that's all I need to say. It's DESMOG, DSMOG Canada. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Three thank yous to do. I want to first of all thank our amazing panel. Carol, Torrance, Chris, Guy, Caitlin, Gerald, and of course Nathan. Staff and the volunteers, without whom we wouldn't be here. Andrew Johnson, Elise all the other volunteers, thank you so much. And my third thank you is the most important of all, to you, Thank you for showing up. Thank you for showing your love for this coast. We will do this. We will make this catastrophe not happen, but only if we stand together. Thank you so much for showing you care.
I'll use the white man's talking stick this time. Just a few moments ago, I met a 92-year-old war veteran out in the hallway. You know, our veterans and our people, they fought for the rights and freedoms of this country. And it's ironic and sad to say today, the people of this land still have to fight for our rights and freedoms. You know, it's really sad. And I wanted to mention, and I want to make a real strong recommendation to the panel, universities, environmentalists, to all the politicians, to get up and speak about the media, put pressure on the media, the scientists, the librarians, our veterans. I'll be in touch with Bishop Logan, the head of the churches, to get Harper to resign. And to all those people across Canada, we've got to say no. You've got to stand up and put a stop to this. So I don't want to take too much time, but I want to say hi to all of you. Hi to